Welcome to Talking in Common, a podcast of all things lifestyle, family, relationships, well-being, kids and culture. This is not a how-to, but an insight into the lives of ourselves and others and how we all manage to get by. Hosted by myself, Kate Gadinsky, and my co-host, Sophie Panton. Take a listen and let's find out what we all have in common.
We're recording. We're back.
We are back after being MIA.
Yeah, good point. We've had a little break, guys. Sorry.
Forgot to tell you. In our heads, we told you.
Life gets in the way of recording a podcast sometimes, doesn't it, my love?
It certainly does. We
just had to take a break for a minute and recoup on life and ideas and guest episodes and recording times, didn't we?
We did, and we have come back today with a epic episode, I think.
I agree. Really, really enjoyed this chat. In fact, I think you just said this was one of the most interesting chats that we've had to date.
Yes, look, I'm going to say we can't have favourites, so I'm going to say there are a few interesting ones that we've had. Does that make sense? Sorry,
a few. They're all
interesting. I mean,
ignore that.
No, all of our chats I find interesting, but I have to say this has probably been one of my favourites and one of the most interesting that we have had. We've just gone and done a 360, babe.
Yeah, no, I agree with you. I think it's very topical. I mean, before we get into it a little bit, let's start with what we have in common. It would be rude not to.
Do you know what I think we have in common?
Tell me, because I feel like I haven't seen you for 3 years, so
I don't actually know what you've got. I don't know if we've got this in common, but I feel like this is the first time in a good year at least that we have literally been together with no kids. Like, because I've either had a baby in my tummy, or you've had a baby in your tummy, or you've had a baby here, or I've had a baby here, or we've had kids here. There's no babies in tummies.
Yeah.
There's no babies here. There's no kids here. It's just you and me.
How do you know there's no babies in tummies?
Well, look, I was making an assumption, and as we talk about actually in this episode, we shouldn't assume, although some assumptions are good. Is there a baby in your tummy?
Not today.
Anyway, but I feel like it's been a long time since it's just been you and I in the room.
Yeah, I agree. What the hell are we sitting here doing this for? Should be out gallivanting.
I was going to say after this we should go and have a wine somewhere.
Yeah, totally. So we've got some sunshine for a change, which is nice. If anyone else lives in Victoria, we've just had this random week of like winter again in the middle of spring and summer, and it's classic. Not classic, actually, not classic. I was going to say classic Melbourne weather. No, it's not. It's climate change at its finest over here. It's frightening.
It's very scary.
Yeah, but anyway, let's not get into that right now. It's not the time or the place. So, or the episode for it. We should do an episode on it, but watch this space. Today's episode is with a great guest, Adrienne Harper-Pike, and we talk all about, what did we talk about? We talk all about gender identity, gender labels, aware parenting,
raising our children to be their authentic selves.
Yeah, and I think it's very topical, like particularly with the gender topic. Like, it's such an ambiguous topic, which it really shouldn't be. I think the more that we speak about it with each other, and the more that we spoke to Adrienne about it, like, it's a lot more clear than we think, really. Like, all these new labels, gender fluidity and non-binary, and all these new terms that have kind of come into our language that have really baffled a lot of people and become really confusing. Like, it just doesn't really need to be that confusing. Once you sort of put yourself out there to educate yourself and understand it, it's actually not that confusing.
And I think, as Adrienne points out quite a bit, is it's all about, yes, educating yourself, but asking a question. If you're unsure, making yourself ask a question. Like, you cannot ask the wrong question. You can make the wrong assumption and you can say the wrong thing, but you're better off to ask a question, get the right answer and educate yourself. So I
Yeah.
think, she told us that, but she also had a lot of great other things that she shared with us. So this is definitely a good episode if you're in the mood to learn something, because I certainly did.
Yeah, likewise. Even just the simple things, like the simple things that people find confusing, like, the difference between sex and gender and how there
Mm,
is a difference.
yeah.
And also just that, yeah, being vulnerable and asking questions is the best way to approach someone or something that you potentially feel a little bit undereducated about or a little bit uncomfortable about.
Mm,
And also just, the way that we're all, or it's important that we all sort of rewire our thinking a little bit and retrain our brains in that way, not
yeah.
to just assume anything about anyone and to ask a question. And, as we spoke to her about as well, like language is such a powerful tool for
Mm,
making people feel comfortable and understood and respected. And it was really nice to learn some ways on how to use language to do that.
yeah, absolutely. I think the
Um,
problem is now is where everyone is so afraid to say the wrong thing
mm,
that, rather than actually getting educated and learning more, people just tend to not say anything, and then they feel uncomfortable. And, it's your own insecurity, really, when you could just learn and ask a
mm,
question. So,
yeah, 100%. So I feel like we're all doing a better things by ourselves, by one another, and for our kids by being open minded and eager to educate ourselves more so. So, this is really what we're here for today. And we
absolutely.
found the perfect person in Adrienne for the assignment because she's like super lovely and really generous in her sharing her experiences and her wisdom, and just like a really great person to chat to. So, let's intro her.
Well, Adrienne Harper-Pike is a cisgender queer parent with a non-binary partner and 5-year-old twins. She's always had a strong desire to create ripples of change and healing within her community. This desire is centered in her values of social justice, human rights, and equality. She also explains in this episode that this drive is more paramount than ever now that she has children of her own to guide through this world.
She's absolutely committed to providing safe and inclusive communities that recognise diversity and provide culturally and linguistically accessible services. She has a master's degree in social work, with her training and education focused on bilingual, bicultural models of practice in the deaf, hard of hearing, and deaf-blind communities, with a focus on intersectionality of sexuality and gender diversity. She's worked closely with Deafblind Australia on the creation of information, resources, and workshops, and is also now an aware parenting instructor. Here's Adrienne. Adrienne, it's so nice to see your face online. This has been a long time coming. Thanks so much for joining us today. How are you?
Oh, thank you. I'm really excited to be here. I'm glad that we, trusted the timing and we have persisted and that we're here today. I'm doing
Mm,
good. Yeah, I'm good. Thank you.
that's good. Good to hear. I know you are busy, so we do really appreciate you taking the time to have this really important and, for me personally, I think inspiring conversation today. I think, given the conversation that we're going to have, it's appropriate to start by asking you your pronouns.
Yeah, great. Thank you for that. I go by she, her pronouns, sometimes they, them, not super fussed, which is a privilege in and of itself, that I don't mind either way. And a little bit about my family is that I have twins who are 5 years old, and one of them goes by she, her pronouns, and the other one goes by he and she pronouns. And my partner is non binary and goes by they. So we've got a good mix in our
Yeah.
family, sort of quite the range of experiences.
Yeah, we're super interested to learn about how you raise your children with gender identity and stuff like that, particularly that they're young. And there's so many questions and so much to learn, I think, in a world that we all know is so gendered, and gender identity being a more common topic of conversation than ever. It's really fascinating and really important, I think, to just have that conversation. But we would really love to just start with hearing your personal story. We know a little bit about your background because you've already generously shared a little bit about yourself with us. But we want to find out a bit more about what makes you you, and what drives you to do what you do.
Yeah, great. Thank you. Well, I'll try to give you the annotated version. So I am from the States. I currently live in Melbourne, well, near Melbourne. I've been here for about 10 years. But in the States, I spent the first 20 so years of my life in the Midwest. And I don't know how familiar you are with America or what sort of that demographic is like, but I'm from an area that is also known as the Bible Belt. So it's a quite conservative, um, limited space. I didn't have a lot of exposure to, it was pretty monocultural, really. I didn't have a lot of exposure to people who might have, other identities outside of outside of mine, or, sort of a varied few. And I never really felt connected to the place where I grew up. I felt quite othered in a lot of ways, and I didn't really understand what that was for most of my childhood and adolescence, and sort of getting into my late teens, early 20s, and the period of really becoming, and moving through all of that was quite significant for me. And so I guess a little bit more about that. So I was in the Bible Belt, but I also was in a family that had significant family violence. So there was a lot of stuff happening at home that impacted on myself and my siblings, and the way we were able to sort of navigate the world, and also our sort of feelings of safety as well, and the ability to be ourselves, which is not something you can really do when you feel unsafe in your home. So yeah, that's a little bit about where I started. And then I really knew from a young age, like probably, I don't know, like grade 6 or 7, that I wanted to have a really different life than what I was in, which is, it's really young to think about it, but
Yeah.
I was very certain. I was like, I'm going to go to school. And my mom was always so amazing at, talking about, well, when you go to university, when you do this, when you do that, and like really embedding that into the narrative that I had for myself. And so I got a scholarship. I got into it when I was in year 7, and I had to do this like 5-year program from year 7 to year 11, and do all of these things in order to then have my uni paid for. I
Wow.
studied, I studied American Sign Language, and I then went on to do an interpreting program. So I moved state for that program, and I knew, I was like, oh, I want to be working in the deaf community. I want to, sign language comes really easily to me. Spoken languages do not. They don't work with my neurotype, but sign language works really well for me. And what I realized through the program, which was an incredible program, is that actually an interpreting position, an interpreting role is really specific, as it should be. And it's really quite ruled by a set of rules and a set of specific, I guess, code of ethics that you need to be in. And you're really within a certain role as the interpreter, right? So you're the conduit of language. And I found that that was too constricting for me. I would be, put in situations where I was seeing just injustice, and people not getting the information because the people in the room with the privilege, right, with who the hearing people, not giving the full information. So I just was like, oh, that doesn't suit me. And all the while in my personal journey, I'm sort of working out who I am. How do I fit in the world? What do I want to be doing with my life? What are my values? Like really individuating from my family of origin, and becoming into myself. And so I sort of thought, well, I've always been really sort of strong in my beliefs around social justice, even though that wasn't really modeled to me by most people. I have an auntie who is incredible, and I'd say she was one of my strongest role models in terms of, feminism, and pushing back against the system, and really trying to do things in different ways than our family has done. So I thought, well, I'm going to study social work. And so then I went to another university to get my master's degree in social work. So that was a university called Gallaudet, which is a primarily deaf university, the sort of mecca of deaf culture and community in the United States. So my degree focused on social work with deaf, hard of hearing, and deaf-blind people. And I knew for sure that that was the space I wanted to be in. I feel very honored and privileged to be able to work within that space and to have been invited in to learn and to really be part of a world that's right next to all of us, right? It's we live next to deaf people, we live next to deaf blind people, but I think most people, unless they had someone in their family or were really intentionally in that space, they might not just realize how prevalent sensory loss is and what that means for the people around them.
Absolutely. At a young age, what was it that made you realize that you did want to push against, the norm or the constraints of your environment, being sort of conservative and religious? Like, what was it in you that made you feel different or want to be different?
I'm not sure. This is a question I've had a lot. I'm not sure. I think there's I think so as I grew up and I, developed and understood this really strong queer identity that I have and this neurodivergent mind that I have and the way that I navigate the world, I think that what that meant for me as a young person before I had language for any of those experiences was that I felt really different. I didn't understand a lot of why things happened. I didn't understand why this person would be treated this way when they're a person just like the one next to them. So I think I sort of was very much like, from a young age, like, well, why wouldn't we all, have access to things? Like it just never made sense to me. And, I think my mom also planted a lot of those seeds, even though she's very much part of this Midwestern culture. She was quite progressive in, you know, pushing back against some of the things that our larger family context would say or do or believe in, and even though she was like the one solo voice against a chorus of many, because it was a really important voice, I think that was also really helpful. So I think those the culmination of those things.
So, Adrienne, can we start with something really simple here? We'd love your thoughts and explanation of gender identity and the difference of this to your sexuality, for example, how gender can be looked at as a social construct.
Yeah, definitely. So I could just talk about this stuff ad nauseum, and to the point to the point where I could get to the point of going, it all just falls apart. Like I can just pick it apart till it's down to nothing. And I'm like, why are we even talking about this? But I guess as a starter, it would be sort of good to notice and acknowledge that often people use those terms interchangeably. So sexuality and gender, when they are in fact quite different. So I'm trying to think about the analogy. I used to run so many queer trainings, and all of my jobs for the last 15 years, I've done lots of queer trainings for staff and things. And we start at this point of saying, okay, so if we look at a person and we are thinking about, I think that it used to be like a gingerbread person. I think this is a bit of an outdated term because I'm a bit of an older queer now. Like I'm not in there with the young hip kids doing the training these days.
You look pretty young and hip to me.
Thanks. Thanks. So we would look at so say a person is born, right, and there are sex characteristics, right? So they're sex assigned at birth, so that's like the plumbing they have essentially, right? And there's so many different levels of sex characteristics, right? But a doctor might do a visual look and go, oh, you've got this part, that means you're this. Oh, you've got that part, that means you're this. But really what we're noticing and seeing by someone's genitals, for example, is the sex that they are, right? That's different to sexuality. So then when that person with whatever parts, right? So the person who the doctor said is a girl, they get a bit older and they think, oh, does my body match the way I feel? Does it match with the plumbing that I have? But this doctor told me that I'm a girl, right? Everyone tells me I'm a girl. Does that actually feel right for me? Does that feel like, do I connect to that? And so that's when we sort of think about the way that we connect to and identify with our body, right? So do we feel this way or do we feel a different way? And so that's the gender part, right? So how we relate to who we are in our body and what our society tells us gender is, right? So it looks really different in every culture, right? So the expectations of sort of binary gender. So binary meaning two, so male and female is typically when you hear conversations, or you hear on the radio, or you read books, or you watch TV, or for the most part, people sort of look at gender and you're either male or you're female. But the reality is that we know that people come in all different ways,
Yeah.
and that you can be any version of anything, right? So gender can look really different for anyone. So when we look beyond male and female, it could look like so many things. Like you might feel like you're a bit male and a bit female. You might not feel like any of them. You might, it might change for you every day. So really gender is how we relate to what our culture tells us these particular types of gender are.
I think that's
Does
the
that make
biggest
sense?
it does make sense. Yeah, I think the biggest misconception from my experience in society and general conversation is exactly that, the difference between sex and gender.
Yes.
And people just can't understand that if you're born with a certain plumbing, as you say, then that's just what you are. If you're born with a penis, you're a man. Whereas the difference is the identity, how people feel.
Yes.
And I think people just find it really hard to understand the difference between those two things, the
Yes. And I
identity
think,
of the gender and that sex that you're born with.
yes.
And that's, I don't know, like, how do we help people understand that there's a difference?
Well, I think it's layers, right? Because I think that the way that we are raised within our culture and our society, the way we're socialized, it embeds these ideas of what it means to be a girl or what it means to be a boy, right? And it does it from the time you're pregnant, right? Like, I mean, people have gender
Absolutely.
reveal parties where they say, like, oh, my child has a penis, I'm having a boy. And then they have a party to celebrate the fact that their child has a penis, is essentially what they're doing, right? But we don't actually know.
Penis party.
Penis party. Like, we don't know if that person's going to grow up and feel like a
Exactly.
boy, right? They're going to be told that they're a boy. Is that going to match how they feel? Maybe.
And
Maybe
how
not.
often
Who
is the
knows?
first thing someone will say if you say, so and so's pregnant? Do they know if they're having a boy or a girl? It's like, how do they
Oh,
know?
every time. Yeah.
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 So even
Right.
like
So
I was just going to say, even the conversation that, obviously Kate and I knew that we were doing this interview with you and having this conversation. So we've been talking about different thoughts and feelings that we've been having. And, we do live in such a gendered world, and it is just so natural in us to gender people and to assume their gender identity. And I think that's the biggest thing that we need to retrain or relearn, is not to assume anything about
yes,
anyone, not just their gender, but anything.
absolutely.
And that's what's
that
really difficult to change, I feel.
100%. I guess the third piece when we talk about this person, so they've got their pipes, they've got the way they connect to their idea of what gender is, what it feels like for them. And then you've got the way that the person might dress, right? So this is the expression, right? So someone might internally feel really feminine, might feel like a woman, but might still dress in a really masculine way, right? So this is where we talk about assumption. So we might see someone, and because they're wearing, sort of culturally stereotypical masculine or male clothing, we might assume, oh, that they're a man, right? We don't actually know. So one of the conversations that we have all the time with my children, who are 5, that we have had really consistently from the start, is we talk about assumptions. So they know what an assumption is. And anytime someone to them or they or even us make an assumption, we go, hold on a minute, I think that was an assumption. I looked at this and this, which made me think this and this. Oh, I don't actually know if that's true. And so really breaking down, because assumptions aren't just about gender, right? It's about culture, it's about language, it's about privilege, it's about education, health, anything, right? It's everywhere around us. We make us, and for a lot of good reasons, right? Like, we make an assumption, a snap judgment. It's really like, I'm signing at you because I can't think of the word, an evolutionary process to be able to make a split decision around, is this person safe for me? Do I relate to them? Do I understand them? Right? So it's one of the ways that we understand our space and ourselves in reference to other people, right? And in a lot of ways, that's really helpful. We might be somewhere and feel really uncomfortable, and then see someone who feels like a safe person and go, oh, hey, can you help me with blah, 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 right? That's a really great way to make an assumption, right? You would hope that your assumption's right in that case.
Yeah.
So I think it's important to note assumptions aren't, generally speaking, all bad, but what they can do in terms of gender and in terms of all these other, I guess, labeling ways that we are in the world, is that they can take away a person's ability to then give you that information and to really be able to be seen for who they are, especially someone who might have a non-binary gender or a gender that's not what you might assume it to be. Making those assumptions might make them feel quite unsafe. So then they might not feel like they can then tell you something different to what you've assumed. So yeah, the assumptions. I'm glad you touched on that. It's really big.
We want to sort of move into a little bit more about language and approachability and appropriateness. But since you've just made that example of the way that you speak to your children about assumptions, I'd love you to share a little bit more about how you do teach and raise your children a little bit more genderless, and like what is the narrative that you have with them. Because I was just saying to Kate before, like, you know, even as someone that does feel to be quite open-minded and aware of the way that I speak to my children and that I don't want to put too much influence on them and all of those sorts of things, naturally boy and girl just comes out of my mouth all the time. So I'd love your thoughts and yeah, like guidance on what your narrative is with them.
Yeah, so that's awesome. That's a great question. I think how beautiful to be in a position as a parent, as a partner, as a person in the world where you just want to learn, right? And you want to go, hold on, are the things that I'm saying and doing, does it really align with the things I want to be saying and doing, or where does it come from? And I think that, even my partner and I who have really intentional ways of parenting around gender, stuff still comes out for us and we're like, oh yikes, where's that from? So I guess in the process or journey of working out what you want this to look like for your family, I think it's really important to remember, like, you're not always going to get it right. I don't even think there is a right. I think it's about trying to figure out what works for you and your family, and what feels good for you and what aligns with your values and the way that I guess you want your young people to be going out and about into the world. And one of the really strong values that my partner and I have is that we want to raise little people who have really amazing critical thinking skills, who are able to look at a situation and have a set of questions that they bring into it. And so do that. So this real sense of curiosity. And so I think that in order for us to sort of embed that into them and how they are in the world, we try to embed that into our parenting. And so we try to approach any conversation with this sense of curiosity, and, seeing where the kids are at, right? So the way that you talk to a 2-year-old is different to a 5-year-old, is different to a 7-year-old, 15, etc. And really looking at where the kids are at and I guess finding out maybe what it is that they're searching for within a question or within a situation, and also what you are searching for, right? So in the example you gave, you were talking about, how do we talk about gender or talk in certain ways with our kids? I think the starting point would be just to notice on a daily basis, like over a week, what you say, right? Anytime my child does something, do I say, oh, good girl, oh, that's my girl, come here, darling, you're such a sweet girl, right? That's how many times in a day are we saying that?
Yeah.
Right. And it's just automatic. I remember when one of my kids was like, I don't know, like 6 months old or something. And I said something like, oh, what a little princess. And I was like, oh my God, where did this come from? What?
But it was a good thought and a good intention on your behalf. But it just
100%.
Yeah.
Yes.
Did you go into having your children, like, had you and your partner spoken a lot about the way that you were going to approach, the way that you approached your parenting, or is this something that's really evolved as you've kind of got further into your parenting journey?
Both.
Yeah.
So being a queer couple who had to be quite intentional and planned in making a family meant we had a lot of time to really look into and talk about all of these things, and having a partner who is non-binary and gender really impacting their experience of the world and of who they are and everything around them. We wanted to be I guess on the same page, and we actually weren't on the same page initially, and still there's things that come up and we have different ideas about it, and it's a work in progress, and we sometimes it's hard. So like I really wanted to raise the kids just fully gender expansive and use they them pronouns, so that I wasn't putting any of my stuff or my ideas or thoughts onto them, offer them any clothing, think about the way that I praise them or the way that I refer to the work that they do, the the qualities that they have, right? So even when we talk about our kids and the qualities they have, they're often quite gendered.
Mm.
And so I was like, yes, let's just like, pull it all apart. Let's just start, like give them just an open blank canvas. And my partner was like, nah, we live in regional Victoria and it's going to be too hard. It's going to be a constant battle, not only for us, but for them. And so we had to get to a point in the middle that felt okay for us, which was we called them boy or girl based on the sex that they were assigned, with the caveat I would say, oh, well, at the moment we've got a boy and a girl. um, but with the kids, not using that language with them, if that makes sense. So we would not use that gendered imprinting onto them, but instead if someone asked us, we'd say, oh, well, we've got this at the moment, but they're not really big enough to know what any of that means, and it's going to be up to them, so sort of putting a bit of context around it. And we've just offered just everything, just offered all the options. So it would be like, do you want to wear a dress today or do you want leggings? Right? So regardless of if you have a penis or don't have a penis, it doesn't actually matter if you have a penis to wear a dress. That's not like a prereq for wearing a dress, right? So
no influencing, just letting them make the decision.
Right. Yeah, just letting them make that choice and not showing, preference. Because even if we don't mean to, we often show preference, if our, especially if the way that we were parented, right? So if certain things in our home were preferenced over others, certain behaviors, being ladylike or being like a really tough, strong boy who doesn't cry, and whatever these stereotypes are, right? They're very present in our families of origin. I would say probably for 98% of us. And so that will more than likely, unless we're actively pushing against it, it will more than likely come out as we parent our children. Sorry, Soph, did you want to say something?
I was just going to say, often it comes out as default, and I have, much like you, something come out of my mouth and then been like, that's not what I believe or feel. Like that's just come out as a bit like autopilot from something that I've heard from, older generations of the way that they parent, that sort of thing.
Social conditioning.
Literally wired into you, right? It's wired into us, right? So when we do say something like that comes out automatically, it's, of course it does.
Like the grandparents will often say, little girls don't do that, little girls shouldn't do this. Like, it's like,
be a good girl, be a good boy, do this thing.
Yeah.
The interesting point that you made, or that your partner even made you aware of, is the environment that you live in and how that's going to fit and feel for yourselves and your children, choosing a specific way to raise your kids, and I suppose the effects or challenges that you'll have if you're kind of going against the grain. And it's something else that Kate and I were talking about the other day, like, what about when they're in a school environment and everyone's called a girl and a boy, and in lots of schools there's still gendered toilets and all of those sort of things, yet in your home you're raising them in a different way. How does that play out? Is that just like, how does that disconnection play out for you? And then also just your guidance on that too.
I think that, I think anyone who chooses to parent in a way that is sort of non-mainstream, right? So like not the standard assumption of parenting, any sort of like conscious parenting, I suppose, you are likely going to you're going to have that disconnect probably at the playground, at the school. You're going to have it when you go on holidays and stay at a hotel. It's going to be everywhere. And we've only had children for 5 years, and in that amount of time, like the amount of, I guess, interactions that have just felt like, wow, this really is like, we do live in a bubble. Wow. Oh my goodness. And, for the most part, until recently, the kids have been mostly too young to really process or understand or take it on. But it's been really fascinating. I had a lot of fear and anxiety about what that would look like for our children, right? Even just having queer parents, what does that mean in an area that, while quite beautiful with beautiful intentions, doesn't have a lot of families that look like ours? And knowing that, it is going to feel for them, they're going to feel it. And what are they going to then take on from that? And I think it's going to look different for each family. But I think having a lot of awareness of what comes up and when it comes up, and getting support, not just for your kids, but for you. So as the parent, I think, as a queer person myself, and then having children who might be perceived as, gender non-binary or gender queer or whatever, there's stuff that comes up for me for that, right? And so finding a space to make sure that I have whatever's happening for me listened to, so that I then don't put it onto my kids, right? I would say that's the biggest thing, because I can't parent from the place I want to parent if I've got too much stuff sitting here in front of me, right? So blocking my heart from their heart. If I have too much here, it's too hard to get to them. So I'd say that's the first thing, because there is going to be a disconnect. Even if you live in a really beautiful country hippie town where it's people have given themselves new names as a I just feel like there's some communities that are so open and welcoming, and even those communities, there's going to be a disconnect, right?
Yeah.
And I feel like we are already having hard conversations, what feel to me like hard conversations with our children. To our children, they're just conversations, right? They don't have the hardness of it, right? They don't carry all of the stuff into it that I carry into it.
That's such a good point, actually. It's just to the kids, it's a conversation.
It's just a conversation.
We've got the feeling of it being a good or a bad or a tricky conversation.
Yeah, it's just neutral to them. Yeah. So I think also having really honest conversations of saying, you're right, that is really different to what we do. We have conversations in our family, and they'll go, well, how come so-and-so does this? And we said, oh, that's because that's what their family does, and that's okay. It's just different to ours. What does our family typically think about this? What do we like to do in this situation? Or say, does that match how we feel? And not telling them it doesn't match, or it's not this, or it's not that, but then saying, well, we really like it when everyone's included. Does that seem like a time that everyone was included? And letting them work through it in that way.
Yeah.
Or how did it feel when that person said that thing to you? And being able to listen, right? Being able to not put my own stuff on them, which is hard. And sometimes I still do, right? I want to jump in and go, no, they shouldn't have, whatever the thing.
Yeah.
It's hard. It's
all
so
the time.
hard.
If my oldest in particular will come home from school and will say something that's happened that she's upset about, and the first thing I want to do is fix it. And I constantly have to stop myself from doing that and just try and listen, because she doesn't really want me to fix it. She just wants me to listen. It's really tricky.
Oh, it's so tricky. Yeah. And that's the thing, is that goes back to, we can't also really listen if we've got too much of our own stuff coming up. So I think, so having the conversation in a really just objective way, sorting out our own stuff in the best way that we can, especially single parents, you're going to be probably at capacity. If you aren't well resourced and you aren't well networked, these things are going to be 10 times harder than someone who's got a partner, who has, family, who looks after children, all these things that I have built in around me that make my life so much more privileged and so much more able for me to move with ease in these spaces. Yes. Did one of you want to say something? No. Okay. That I think, I think it's okay if sometimes it's too hard, and it's okay if having the conversation, you actually don't have capacity for it, or it comes out in a way that you don't want it to, or it looks like something different. I don't think you have to get it right all the time. I think when we talk about gender and just parenting in general, right, I think that a lot of people are so worried, right? We don't want to mess up our kids. That's the last thing we want to do. We just want to give them the best that we can within the capacity that we have. And that's so different for each person. But also, I'm using air quotes here, messing up, right? Not getting it right, whatever that means, is actually such a crucial, incredible part of parenting, right? So if you had a conversation with your kid and they asked you some question about gender and you actually couldn't answer them, what a powerful opportunity to say, you know what? I actually have the same question. I don't know. Or I'm going to find out, because that's my job as an adult, is to find out. I'm going to get that information for you. Boom. Right. And then you can take the time, do what you need to do, process it, prepare yourself for how you want to talk about it. Yeah. And then come back and say, hey, do you remember when we were talking the other day and you asked me about blah, blah, blah? Well, I told you I was going to find out, and I did. Can we talk about it? And they might not want to. What conversation, and then just let it go. That's okay. Right. The amount of times my child has asked me something profound and I'm like, okay. Yeah. Can we talk about it in a little bit when I've had some time to take some deep breaths? Yeah. And then I bring it up and they're like, oh no, I worked it out. And I'm like, oh, okay, good. Glad you're feeling good. That's great.
That response works well for questions that you don't know the answer to, but also just the million questions that you get thrown at. My eldest child is 3.5, almost 4.
Oh, so many questions.
It's very much the why era. Why? But why? And it sometimes just gets to a point where I'm just like, I actually just don't even know. I don't even know how to respond to you. I can't keep answering why. So
Yeah, there's
it's
no answer.
perhaps a good response when you don't know the answer to something, but also just when you're sick of being asked why.
And I've even had times where I've said, I don't feel like I can talk to you about this right now. Bringing it up brings up some big feelings for me, and I'm not able to give you the best answer because I have too many big feelings right now. I think sitting in the space of vulnerability with our children and
So
with our
good.
friends,
Important.
with our peers, it's so important. We might be, if we're at work, if we're out in the community, if we've got, some specific stuff around wanting to get someone's pronouns right or whatever the thing is, coming to it from a place of, well, what's my intention, right? What do I want from this situation? Is it genuinely that I want to be able to like really see and understand and support this person, or is it that I'm just really curious and it's nothing to do actually with anything, right? So like, what's our intention? And if our intention is that we want to help that person feel seen or understood or show that they're safe with us or whatever it is, approaching it from a place of vulnerability is really powerful.
We want to move into that a little bit more,
Oh,
like
great.
how we approach people and the appropriateness. But can I just ask quickly, out of
Yes.
interest, how, as your children are 5 now, how do they feel about gender identity?
Oh,
Do they want to
yeah.
lead to one or the other, or are they
I
curious? Do they express a gender that they feel more of, or where are they at with that?
Oh, it's such a big question. So, it's
If it's
really
too
tricky.
personal, you don't have to
No, no,
answer
no, no,
it.
no. I am one, I very much love the timing of things. And I think the timing, if you had asked me this 6 months ago when we first talked about having this chat, my answer would have been very different than it is right now.
Okay.
And I think that's quite powerful for me and for my family as well. And also just,
And for
I guess,
them, probably.
yeah, it is.
They grow so much and they change so much
So
so quickly.
quickly. I think it's tricky. So we have two little people, so they're twins, and they both have told us, I feel this or this. Okay. And that's great. But what does that mean? Because we've not taught them that to be a girl means this, or that to be a boy means this, or that to be non-binary means this. We've not taught them those things, right? We're really intentional with, we'll see someone out on the street and we won't go, oh, that man's working on the whatever. We'll say, oh, that person in the worker over there, right? So we, in all of our language, we're really gender neutral. We read a book. We don't use the pronouns in the book, right? We mix them up. We maybe, if there's like really gross stereotypical stuff in a book, we'll swap the pronouns around, or we'll like, just things like that, just to really try to pick apart all the layers at which gender is coming in at us all the time. And so now we have two people who are 5, and they are not always in our little bubble at home, and they've had 3-year-old kinder and now 4-year-old kinder, and they're going to go to prep next year, and they're with other people whose kids do have really strong ideas of what gender is for them and for their family. And then my kids are observing that and then coming home and talking about it and playing about it and trying it on, really like working out, well, do I resonate with what that means? And so at the moment, one of my twins she has identified as a girl for about a year, quite strongly, and in a quite feminine presentation as well, which has been really fascinating. That for my partner and I both, we were like, our initial reaction was like, oh God, like, right? Because we're like, you can be a girl, but you don't have to do these things, right?
You
But
don't have
then
to dress up like a princess every day.
that's right, exactly. And then for me to go, okay, well, what was my experience? What did people expect from me, right? I was always a tomboy, and I always felt like I needed to be prettier, or I needed to be girlier, or I needed to sit with my legs closed, or I needed to, do all these like I felt a lot of pressure on me to be a girl in a certain way. And so then I see my daughter, right, coming home to me saying, I'm a girl and girls do these things, all these things that as a girl I was like, no, I'm none of these things, right? So like it brought up a lot of stuff for me. And then I have had to work really hard at coming to a place of going, well, actually, you can be really feminine and you can be all of these things, and that's also really okay, right? And so I have to break apart what that means for me and not pass that on to her. So
Yeah.
right, it's big.
Yeah.
And then I guess the thing that's been happening recently, she's going through, as kids go through sort of stages of autonomy and individuation, but then realignment with attachment figures, what they'll want to do is they do lots of mimicking. So there's different ways that kids will create attachment with their main adults or their group of adults, and one of them is through copying. So she often wants to dress how I'm dressing, or if I'm wearing red lippy, she wants to wear red lippy, or if I have a thing, she's like, oh, can I have that when I'm bigger? And there's a real component there of, I don't think for her it's about, I don't think she wants to wear red lipstick, right? Because that's what girls do. I think she wants to do it because that's what mom does. And there's a real connection, and she'll be like, let's wear these same colors. There's a real attachment alignment piece there. So I think there's lots of layers to it, right? So she's expressing herself, but for her, those things aren't about gender. That's about connection.
And just expression of the way
And
she
just
feels.
expression. That's right. Exactly. And well, you really like it and you feel happy. And, and even my partner and I come out and I've, look, I don't usually have on lipstick or something other than my PJs or whatever. And I come out and my friends, oh my God, you look beautiful. Right. And that's a difference, right? To when I walk in the room with like, looking a mess, right? Looking haggard in my, my PJs, I've not changed out of all day. And, just, it's so different, right? So they notice that stuff. And so then my partner and I to go, ooh, okay, we need to actually be really careful about how we speak also to each other with compliments. Like, I need you to tell me that I look beautiful when I come out with a rat's nest in my hair and looking like I've got that for 3 days, like we've got to really, really be aware of just, they pick up everything. Nothing gets past them.
No, I appreciate you sharing that. And I think it's made a really nice point for people that struggle with, kids being too girly or too boy like, because like I think there's this kind of thing of like people feeling like it's not okay as well. Like if you are trying to raise them to be more genderless and not influence them too much, yet they still want to dress up like a princess every day. You don't want to have the opposite effect and sort of make them feel
like
shamed or something, like
yes,
they can't.
exactly. And that's a really tricky space. It's a really tricky space, and it's a spot that we're still navigating, right? Like we're still trying to work out what does that mean and where do we put in certain limits around things. And like we're actively checking in with our friends who raise their children similarly, going, okay, well, what parameters do you have around, actually this is not actually a great time to wear a dress, like what, and what's the core of it, like why, what do we want from them out of clothing, or what do we want from them in the situation? Do we want them to be safe? Do we want them to be able to play? Do we want them to be able to get dirty or whatever the thing is? And then how can we keep that as the focus versus all the other bits and pieces that come along with it? But also, I guess, in that conversation, we're still really actively, when they say something that's quite gendered or that they bring home and they ask about, they'll say, they've probably a handful of times now, they've said something like, oh, that man over there. And I'll go, oh, who are you talking about? And they're like, that person. I'm like, oh, I don't know if they're a man. Do you know if they're a man? And really like, and not like, belittling, but just going, oh, what makes you think that? Oh, well, he's got onto this. Oh, well, I've got something like that, but I'm not a man. Well, that's true, and like really breaking down when they make this assumption, where's it coming from? And challenging, okay, well, he's a worker on a road. Well, yeah, but actually, look, that person is a worker on a road, but they look really different. Do we know their gender? We don't. We actually don't.
Encouraging that critical thinking.
That critical thinking, yeah. Yeah, and we, it's so beautiful. I heard one of the kids say the other day, well, you only know if someone's a boy or girl if they tell you. And I was like, oh, that's right.
That's what you want.
That's right.
Can I ask a random, might feel like random question? What do your kids call you and your partner?
Oh, good question. So they call me Mama and they call my partner Rennie. So parent, P-A-R-E-N, Ren. So Ren as in the middle part of parent. So just a gender neutral. So Ren or Rennie is the word that they use for their parenting term. Yeah, it's really cute, actually.
How did you get to that? Did you guys come up with that? Or?
Ash came up. Well, I think Ash is a bit of a research nerd and spent a lot of time trying to work out what they felt connected to, because a lot of the words that we found that exist out there for queer families and, non-binary parents and stuff, we just were like, that doesn't work for us. So when they brought that up, they were like, no, that feels really good. And it's funny because for the first 3 years, the kids didn't call my partner Rennie. They called them by their name. And I was like, oh, what if, and then we were like, what if they're never gonna, like, even though we're actively saying, oh, give Rennie this, and I had like a sign that we used for their parent name, right? But they just, because they heard, everyone using their name more commonly than they heard anyone calling them the parent name. Because people at the park would say, oh, go give your mama this thing, right? They look at me and they assume I'm a mom, right? Grandparents would call me a mama, like whoever is around us, right? So they were only hearing really Rennie from a select few people. And I think that they were hearing Ash, their first name, from heaps more people. But now Rennie's tried and true. It's not going anywhere.
I like that. That's nice. That was a good question.
Yeah, thank you.
So let's talk a little bit more about language and approachability.
Yeah.
I suppose still to gender, but even disabilities or differences, just so everyone involved is comfortable and respectful.
Yeah.
Language, as we know and as we're learning, it's such a powerful tool in the way that it makes people feel. So what's your guidance on how we use it?
How we use language.
Yeah.
Ooh, how much time do you have? Well, I guess the language is evolving, right? And the terms that I use now are probably, maybe, like I was saying, I'm a bit of an old queer now. Maybe the young kids, there's probably new terms and things evolving within the community that I'm disconnected from, right? So I probably am not able to, I don't feel comfortable speaking to the experience of younger people in the queer community, because it's probably really different to, what I had or how I feel. So I think if we have that lens of going, okay, well, language evolves and the way that I feel about something is probably different than the way you two feel about something, and that's okay, and that my relationship to certain words or certain concepts or ideas are really impacted by my experience, right? So I think if we know going into any situation that if we know that we don't know, if that makes sense, we don't actually know what's happening for this person. We don't know what they're coming to us with. We don't know what their morning has been like. We don't know the way that they have been excluded or included from their community. We don't know any of these things. But what we can know is that their relationship to, these sort of like hot topic terms or, labels of identity are going to be much more complex than we can understand unless they tell us. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm. So asking
yeah,
questions.
so asking questions and just being really curious. And I think a lot of times sort of you still see it happening some, but like in disability sector. So, I work in the deaf and deafblind community, and there's been this history of expecting that people who are deafblind will teach you and they'll run trainings and they'll, do everything they can to make you feel comfortable. And this real sort of responsibility of teaching falls onto the shoulders of the people with the lived experience, which it's incredibly important to hear and see and understand and give people a platform to express their lived experience, right? But the expectation of us, people, in a different, who don't have that same experience, to then expect them to teach us, that's kind of yuck. That's not good. We need to sort of shift away from that. And so I think it's really okay to, maybe you're having an interaction and there's a situation or a word that comes up, or maybe you find yourself stumbling over something because you just don't know how to talk about it. Saying, oh, I feel really uncomfortable right now, and that's about me. I don't actually know what to say because I don't know about this, or this. So thank you for being really patient. Can you just tell me what I need to know right now so that we can just keep talking if that's appropriate. And when we leave, I'm going to go home and I'm going to read about it, or I'm going to chat with so-and-so, or I'm going to do whatever this thing is. Because that's on me to learn. It's not on you to teach me.
I think that makes a great point, because it's really not the responsibility of the person with the difference to teach you how to be appropriate to them, is it? Like that's
exactly.
just another
another way of
unfairness,
disempowering.
Disempowering it,
yeah. And to and also
there is
to
just
remember
so much
that
fear. Like people just have so much fear, like of saying the wrong thing, of doing the wrong thing, and like we've all experienced it. I felt like that. You just don't. I don't know. For me personally, I am curious and willing to learn and educate myself to make people feel comfortable. And becoming a parent is like a big driver for me, wanting to push myself further in that sort of direction, because I want to make my kids feel empowered and loved, but I want to raise them to do the same. But I just want, my family, my children, my community to feel comfortable in who they are and what they choose and what they do, no matter their differences. Yet my upbringing and what I already know is just so sort of like heavily, what am I trying to say? So heavily like infiltrated into the way that I am, that you just then become a bit afraid to say the wrong thing. It's really difficult. It's really
Yeah, and I think
difficult.
it is really difficult. And I
It's a
think
really
also,
long-winded way of
no, that's
explaining
okay.
what
I
I was
think
trying to say, but
when we live in a world of social media and ways that things move in online spaces, I think that also creates a lot of fear for us around, someone being canceled or being perceived in a
yeah.
different way, or, all these sort of, there's an extra layer because of the time and the place that we live in.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think if we're talking online, I think I would always move with caution. I would be more hesitant to engage than not to engage until I felt really confident that I knew what I was talking about, and that whoever I was interacting with was going to feel safe, and that I would feel, all these sort of parameters around that. But if we're in person and we're in a space with someone, it's really okay to say, I don't know this. The amount of times I've said, I come from white girl country backwoods Indiana. I have never been around X, Y, and Z, and I know that. And so this is a learning space for me, and I'm going to act like an active learner. And so I'm sorry if I've done this and this, but thank you for being patient while I figure it out,
Yeah.
And not sort of expecting them to be like, oh, no, that's fine. You're getting it. Because that's not what I want, right? Like, I want someone to know, actually, my intentions for being here are that I want to learn, and I do want to get it, quote unquote, right. And I want everyone to feel safe and okay in this space.
It's a good way to put it.
Yeah. Adrienne, you touched on aware parenting a little bit before, but for anyone listening who might not know exactly what aware parenting is, can you tell us?
I'm an aware parenting instructor, and aware parenting, the three tenets are that it's attachment style parenting. So we offer connection with our children in ways that will support and continue attachment with them, right? Because we know secure attachment, there's so much research that shows secure attachment is what creates a really well-rounded, connected young person and then adult in the world. And it also uses non-punitive discipline. So no punishments, no rewards. And we use really playful discipline in our home. So this looks different for every family, but there's a real playful approach within aware parenting. They use what's called attachment play. So that's good for discipline, but also for the attachment connection. And then the third component is that babies and children are able to heal from stress and trauma. And so that by parenting them in this particular way, we can support them to continue to thrive and grow and not hold on to stressful, traumatic things that happen to them, and then just continue moving, right? So it's going to have less of an impact on their development, on their, their peer relationships, their, education, all these things that are affected by when a young person experiences stress or trauma. If we can support them to move that and not keep it in their body, it's going to look like a very, very different life for them. So those are sort of the three main aspects of aware parenting. And the thing that really drew me in was attachment play, because I just think it's so powerful. That's what my children invited me to do, was to start doing some of our own family healing through play. And I realized, I can't support us to do any healing because I have so much of my own healing to do. And there's a real beautiful part of aware parenting that supports parents to look at the way that they were raised and what comes up for them now as parents, what feels challenging for us as parents now, has nothing to do with our children, right? Our children's not being a pain. They're not being challenging. They're not pushing our buttons. They're not doing any of those things. They're just being kids. And we're just having our own trauma reaction, right? So those parts of us that are wounded from childhood that we might not have a narrative memory of, but we have a felt an embodied memory of that comes up for us as feeling annoyed with our children. Aware parenting supports us to acknowledge that and then find ways to start to heal that so that we can then show up differently for our children.
I think it's really interesting, like specifically how to raise them without punishment and reward, because again, it's something that just like comes naturally to us because of our history.
Yep.
So how do you do that?
But still have boundaries, because I think boundaries can be quite important, or are important.
Yeah.
I personally think that.
And I love that question. And so many people, the first thing they say is like, how do you do it? And how do you have boundaries? And so I think it's important. Oh my God, we could do a whole chat just about this. Just to, I guess, oh geez, how do I even frame it? So we are in relationship with our children, right? We are also their place of safety, right? So if we come to every interaction with them as a place of safety, but also their space for learning and their space for, exploring and sharing and having every gamut of everything, right? That sits with us. When they're little, it grows as they get bigger, their networks grow. But if we look at what a child does, what children do, what they need. And if we look at a child's behavior as being simply a result of a feeling that they're having. So children are naturally cooperative, right? So when we in our family, we talk about being balanced or being out of balance. And this is the language that our kids use as well. They might say, oh, I'm too out of balance. I can't go to that thing right now. I won't be able to cope, right? And so if we look at these behaviors, which, are sort of socially termed as like challenging or tantrums or there's all different language that aware parenting uses, but these things that are really hard, right? For us as parents, if we were parented, the imprint that we bring with us into the situation is that we were sent to our room, or we were smacked, or we were whatever these things were. We were, our parents gave us the silent treatment until we did the thing they wanted us to do. And if that's the only thing we've ever known, it can feel really confronting to think about that it could be done really differently, and to think that the process of learning and growing as a child into adulthood could be done sort of in relationship and in safety. And so if we think about we're the safe person, and we don't want to be a place where the kid ever feels in trouble. One time someone said to my kid, oh, bet you get in trouble for that. And my daughter looked at me and said, what does trouble mean? Right? No concept of it, because it's not what we have in our house, right? So when a child has a big behavior, we go, well, what's happening for them? Are they thinking something? Are they feeling something? Do they have some stress or trauma in their body that they need to move? Like, what's happening to create this behavior, right? And there's so much beautiful space for limits. So we use loving limits instead of boundaries. So we would look at, what's happening for this person. Are they doing something that's, are they hitting the wall, or they're throwing a thing that's not safe? I'm not actually willing for you to do that thing. Sweetheart, I see that you're upset. I'm going to have my arms here with you, honey, because I'm not willing for you to throw that. Right? You're not in trouble, but what I see is that you're having a really hard time, and you're not in the part of your brain that can make the choice to not do that, right? You're way too out of balance to be able to make those choices. So my role as the imbalance, sorry, I almost said regulated, not a word that I use or like to use, as the person who's in balance, who's mirroring to them how to come back into balance and how to move through these really big feelings. That's the space. So, I guess it's not like, oh, you're in trouble that you've done this and now this thing is happening. It's instead going, oh, darling, are you feeling really out of balance? Like, that's not something you would typically do. You must be really frustrated. Did this thing happen? I'm right here for you. I see that you're having a hard time.
And also, you've mentioned about the power of play with children too, and communication through play. And so sort of, on the opposite side, what's the power of that, the communication and raising children through play?
So, and also in discipline through play as well. So like, for example, I was thinking of a time I was with a friend, and we were at a park, and my kids didn't want to leave, but we needed to go. It was getting late. It was cold. We hadn't had food. And the kids were like, it was one of those situations, as a parent, you assess and you're like, oh, this could go one of two ways. Like, I need to brace myself, like what's about to come. And I know for me that when I have enough spaciousness to show up for them with play, to respond to them with play, that the response from them and the buy-in from them is going to be about 100% better than when I don't have capacity and I'm like, get in the car, please, right? Like
They
the
don't
path that
react well to that, do they? No.
no, who would? What if your partner spoke to you that way? Your best friend, you'd be like, I'm sorry, don't talk to me that way.
So true.
Who wants to be spoken to? So in this particular situation, I was like, oh God, I'm so tired. But I was like, I know if I can muster this 5 minutes of play, it's going to be a 5-minute play to the car versus a half an hour of me sitting and putting in limits and holding feelings and, them refusing to get in and crying outside of the car. Right. Which, sometimes there are really amazing times when I get excited. I'm like, I'm going to put a limit in here and they're going to cry and cry and they are going to move this anger that they have. And that's going to mean that the next few days are going to be easy, smooth sailing. Right. So I welcome a rage. I welcome a big, but when I don't have space for that, when I can't listen to anger, when I can't listen to whatever big feelings my kids have, if I can muster up 5 minutes of connection, right? How much more likely if you have, I don't know, a partner or a friend or a boss, right? And you feel a bit of buy-in, you feel connection and respect and excitement and fondness towards this person. And they ask you to do a thing that's kind of annoying, right? But you're feeling really connected and good with that. You're like, oh, of course, honey, I got you, right? If you're like, you've had enough of them, right? And you feel totally disconnected. They haven't listened to you. They haven't respected you. They used a really harsh tone with you. You felt really, dismissed or whatever these things are. And then they ask you to do that annoying thing. Likely you're going to want to give them a different response, right? So if we view that same thing with our children, right? Because they experience micro stresses and traumas just like we do. They experience, we're their not their end all be all, but we're pretty important to them. And so if they've had a series of yucky things with us and they feel disconnected, they're much less likely to do what we ask them to do, right? And when a child is uncooperative, that's because they're probably feeling disconnected. That's one of the main, it could be that they're feeling disconnected or that they have some big stress and trauma that hasn't been healed, right? So if we can come in a situation with some play, right? So I turned this into, I was like, okay, I can do this. And I ran past them and I was like, you'll never catch me. And then I started running, right? And then they were chasing me, but I didn't go to the car, right? We chased and ran around the field and then I hid and then they hid and then we chased. And then I was like, I'm going to the car. You'll never get me in the car. And they're like, I'm going to get in the car first, right? And it turned into this 3 to 5 minute game. I was puffed at the end of it, but we were in the car, right? And no one was upset. And then they felt connected and we laughed, right? And then I felt better as well because then it felt good, right? Like it felt good for me to be able to connect with them that way and to move in the space that we want to. So I guess that's one example. It's not always, we don't always have the ability to do play with our kids. I know I don't. It's just not realistic based on the world that we live in. But when we can come in with lots of play for discipline and also just for connection or for helping them move stress and trauma, the connection we have with our children and it's it's night and day difference when I can show up for my kids with play, unbelievable the difference.
It is the best thing that I've learned in my parenting career so far. And originally learned from the wonderful Lael Stone, who we've got to thank, who put us in contact with you.
Yeah, she's amazing.
When I tried that obviously naturally you play with your kids because they live in a playful world and they don't have the stresses and time restraints and things that we're living by. So naturally you try that and you see that it works. But when someone put it to me like that, like a way of communicating with them and connecting with them and getting them to do the things that you need them to do within a time frame that you need to do, I just could not believe the difference. It's literally
it's so simple.
But it's also it's such not a part of I feel like we are socialized out of play. Big kids don't do this. Stop being silly. Be serious. That's too blah, 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 And a lot of people, especially based on how they were played with as children, can find different types of play really challenging, right? So if there was a situation and it was a situation that you were not ever allowed to speak back or you weren't allowed, in your family of origin to do this specific thing, and the last thing you could ever imagine doing is playing with your child as a response to that, that's probably because the last thing your parents would have ever done with you is play in that situation. So I think it's the gap between what we can theoretically see and what we might want to do can be really different from our experience and our imprint that we bring with us into parenting. So I think it can sound easy to go, oh, just play with your kids, it'll be great, but it's not that simple. But when you do have the capacity and you can come in and you can show up for them and be really present, right? Because kids know if you're like, oh yeah, and you're not really responding, right? Like not actually listening. They know when that's happening. If we can really show up and be really present for them, the difference is just incredible.
It's literally like what you like, really, you've got to muster up the energy. Like if it's the end of the day and it's you're trying to get them to go to bed and you're literally like, I'm going to go to bed if you're not going to go. I just want to yell at you because I am so done with the day.
Oh, done.
But let me just take a minute and be creative and think of a fucking way to make this fun. And then you turn it into a game. And then before you know it, like they're into bed.
Oh my God.
That's
I
how
have
I
to be
get
honest, it
my
doesn't
kids into bed.
always work. It's not 100% strike rate, but it's pretty close. It's the best thing that I've learned for sure.
It works with my two oldest kids because they just want to both like be the first one to get into bed. If I say, let's see who can get there the quickest. And then if I get there and beat them, they don't like that. So they run pretty fast.
That's so funny. We have a really, one of the things I was actually thinking heaps about how I want to offer this, because I talk to a lot of families who are like, bedtime's really hard. It's the end of the day. And we're just like, oh my God, I'm so cooked. Like, can you please just not fight me on this one thing? Like, just brush your bloody teeth, please. Like, just put on your PJs, right? Like, whatever the thing is, like, can you just do it? Having a routine at nighttime that incorporates play is so powerful. And in fact, in our family, we like every night there is a nighttime play. And like usually around dinner time, we start to talk, oh, what are we going to do around our nighttime play? Right. And it's a really exciting part. Right. So it's actually a really beautiful, we're like, and we don't use it as a reward or a bribe to go, oh, well, once you've done this, this, and this, we can play. But instead we go, I'm so excited. Once we finish brushing our teeth, I cannot wait to play blah, blah, blah. Right. So I'm not even saying, let's go brush your teeth. Come on, brush your teeth now. But instead, I'm walking towards the bathroom and I'm down with them and I'm talking to them like this and they're following me. And then we're in the bathroom like, oh, here's our toothbrushes. I'll be this character. You be right. And so it's like just the space that it creates for us to move through these otherwise challenging or hard moments and do it with connection, right? And do it really fun. It's so different. And like, even if it's 3 minutes, right? We'll still do a play. Like if we're like, guys, it's really late. This, and this was really challenging tonight and we didn't really nail it. So we can have 3 minutes of play, right? Or like the other night, one of the kids was really tired and the other one, she had really big feelings. I had a hard day because I was having a hard time with her feelings and she was having a hard time with her feelings because I wasn't able to listen to them, right? And so bedtime came and I was like, right, she's not going to sleep tonight if I don't give her a space to have a rage. And so we could have played for 3 minutes because what's 3 minutes, right? But instead I said, sweetheart, it's actually really late. I'm not willing for us to have a play tonight. Oh my God, she was devastated and she screamed and cried and she was like, this is so unfair. I need a nighttime play. My body needs movement. I need to get this out of me. All the language we use to reflect like the importance of play, right? And I'm like, I really hear you, sweetheart. It's so important, but I'm not willing for that tonight, right? And it gave her an opportunity to move these big feelings she'd been carrying all day that for whatever reason, I wasn't able to show up for her and she wasn't able to lean into them until that moment. And then after she moved those, she was like, let's read a book now. And then crawled into bed and we read a book.
That exact same thing happened with my oldest daughter last night. She had like a full moment. When I say moment, it probably went on for like an hour and she was so beside herself, so upset. And she just kept saying she was so tired. And I just thought, I'm just going to let her be because, that's what you need to do. And by the time she went to bed, she was completely different. She was so calm, so much happier, happy to get into bed and woke up this morning like a different person.
I mean, have you ever like had a big cry and then had the best sleep of your life and then been like, oh my God, I feel so much better after that?
She like bounced in this morning. She was like bouncing down the hallway. I'm like, whoa, you're very different this morning. But yeah.
How powerful, because when the emotions sit in our body, right, it literally weighs us down. Like we don't have the same pep in our step. We don't want to bounce down the hallway because we feel heavy. We feel, unable to be ourselves. Right. So to really move and to shake and to cry and to, like it can feel confronting as a parent to see a child, not that she was doing this, but to see a kid like stomping their legs or hitting their fists or flailing around. Right. That's from an aware parenting perspective. That is so good.
She was doing a bit of that.
get it out. Good. And like the more of that there is, it's like they're going to be so much more move back into a place of balance after that. It's so powerful. And then seeing that you go, oh, right. It actually does. It does make sense. It does work.
Now, Adrienne, we don't want to keep you too much
Yeah, no
longer because
worries.
we want to allow you to get on with your day. But I just wanted to talk about, I mean, you've been so generous sharing everything about your parenting styles and raising children to be their authentic selves and all the things that we can do to support children. But I just wanted to ask you about you and your generosity and dedication to a really inclusive environment and what this means to you nowadays and also just to community.
Yeah, thank you. I guess it's always felt really important, but it sort of leveled up as I became a parent. I went, all right, it's not just, me and my, I'm using air quotes, hardened shell. I've like, I'm quite resilient and I can like manage these things and I can, navigate situations. But now it's these beautiful children who like, I don't want them to have to go through the same things that I went through. I don't want them to, and that's not just personal experience, right? Like, I don't want them to live in a world that has X, Y, and Z happening. It's still going to happen, but what can I actively do to raise them to be really, like agents of change essentially, and to be able to show up in that space as protected and as confident in themselves as possible, but also to hopefully see the world through a lens that looks at similar things to what I look at. So how do we make sure that people are included? When we look at, I guess, accessibility and accommodation, there's all this, it's a hot topic to be like, well, how do we have accessible this and how do we accommodate that? And it's like, well, it's actually, there's a series of steps that need to be taken from start to finish, right? When you build a building or when you create a workshop or when you do a video online, right? And if you skip a step, right, because you don't think about it, what you're doing, that's where the accessibility falls out, right? So if we know what all the steps are to make something accessible, so for example, at my other job that I have, when we make a resource, we do something in a plain English Word document and we make it so that it can be inverse colors so they can swap the colors around. We also then make a video in Auslan that mirrors the plain language, right? And also breaks down more complex terms. It's also then captioned and then it's voiced over. And then we provide a transcript.
Wow.
Right? That for one document, right? That's the steps to make sure that anyone, whether they're accessing with a braille note, whether they're watching, with limited vision, maybe they've got a pinhole of vision and they can watch the video, maybe they can, hear the voice, however they access the content, they're going to be able to do it, right? So if we can, I guess, not view accommodation and accessibility as extra, but instead viewing that the world that we live in has created spaces that intentionally have left people out. And have left people out, for reasons that are really yuck, that feel really ick. And it's about, like, I really think it's about, capitalism and colonization and, keeping certain, people and communities in positions of powerlessness or in positions where they don't have access to things. And if we can really pick apart where that came from and what it looks like, and we can actively be working against that. Like, I mean, I just think, I think we still have a responsibility to make sure that, especially as a person, I'm white and I'm educated and I speak English and, I've just got so much privilege that I feel a personal responsibility to use that privilege as a platform to do what I can. Because there's a lot of people who cannot, or who do not have, it's not safe for them to do that, or, whatever that looks like. So I think I just want to see a world where more people are, they feel connected and they feel seen and they feel safe to be in the world.
We need more people in the world.
Yeah, like you in the world.
Thank you.
Amazing.
Really kind.
Thank you so much for your time. You've been so generous with all your wisdom and knowledge and point of view on the world, and it's been graciously accepted. We really appreciate it.
Yeah. Thank you so much, Adrienne.
Oh, thank you so much. I appreciate it. Have a great rest of your day.
You too. We'll talk soon.
Talk soon.
Bye.